Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. This is Reading with Your Kids. We are coming to you from the beautiful book-loving neighborhood of Reedville, the loveliest neighborhood in all of Boston. We are so very happy that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by introducing you to the coolest authors, the funnest tales, and a whole lot of reading inspiration for the whole family. You can join us in our mission by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Amazon Music, CastBox, Audible, YouTube. Wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. Really wonderful show for you today. First up, Emily Sun Lee is here to celebrate Mr. Chow's Night Market. Later in the show, we will take a listen back to a conversation we had with Andrea Wang in her book, Watercress. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by the Fred the Snake series, written by Dr. Peter Cotton. I just got back from the COSPA National Education Conference. 1,500 school leaders from across the country. And I have to tell you, one of the biggest smiles at our booth came from a little snake named Fred. We were sharing the Fred the Snake book series, and again, superintendents and educators were drawn in by the bright, colorful illustrations. They'd pick up a book, start flipping through it, and you could just see it. They got it. These are the kinds of stories kids want to read. But you know what really stopped them in their tracks? When I told them that the author, Dr. Peter Cotton, was a world-renowned gastroenterologist and teacher before he began writing children's books. And suddenly it clicked. Here's someone who spent a lifetime helping people, now using the same care, the same curiosity to create stories that help kids feel brave, welcome, and excited to learn. The Fred the Snake series now includes 10 wonderful adventures, from getting mended to going to school to exploring cities and beaches with friends, and every one of them is filled with heart, humor, and connection. We loved having Dr. Peter on Reading with Your Kids, and I can tell you, educators at the COSPA conference love Fred the Snake just as much as we do. So if you're looking for stories your kids will laugh with, learn from, and want to read again and again, meet Fred the Snake. Because with Fred the Snake, the real magic happens when we choose kindness and become a friend. Joining us from her vehicle somewhere in upstate New York, our guest is here today to celebrate her new picture book. It's called Mr. Chow's Night Market. Please welcome to the show, Emily Sun Lee. Emily, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. How are you, Jed?
I'm great. I'm really looking forward to getting to know a little bit about Mr. Chow's Night Market. I haven't had the pleasure of traveling to Asia yet, but we have lots of connections. We hosted international kids here in our home, many of them from China, and so I've heard stories of night markets. And so tell us all about the book, please.
Yeah, I hope to add one more night market story then.
Cool.
Mr. Chow's Night Market. It's my debut picture book. It actually comes out tomorrow, so you're catching me at a really good time. I'm super, super excited. It's about a very sleepy grocery store in Taiwan and this grumpy, equally sleepy grandpa that owns it named Mr. Chow. And they both have trouble waking up early enough to open that grocery store on time, so they decide to transform the grocery store into a night market instead. And it's, to me, a celebration of night owls like myself, of Taiwanese snacks and culture. I had the great pleasure of living there for a couple years and teaching English, which was incredible, and sort of the courage that it takes to try something a little bit different. And I really hope that people enjoy it, including the listeners of this podcast.
Well, I love that. I love the idea of like recognizing that you're kind of not good at something and then saying, well, let's go to plan B.
Totally. Yeah. I hope so. I mean, I'm biased, but I also really am privy to that message myself. I think that, yeah, sometimes we sort of hear the narrative of the importance of sort of changing yourself, in order to fit societal standards or expectations. And I thought it was kind of important to champion a story that's sort of about ways in which you can actually change your environment or sort of ask society to bend a little bit to your preferences sometimes, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's a really important message. I think especially now, because, when I was growing up, I'm almost 100 years old. When I was growing up, the idea was, you're going to get a job for the state, for the city, for whatever big company there is, and then you're going to stay there forever. Right. And that, to be honest with you, that terrified me. The idea of staying in one job forever terrified me. So I was a social worker. I was a professional clown, magician, and now we're doing this podcasting. And it's been a wonderful life. And I was just at an educational conference, and the keynote speaker was talking about the fact that one of the greatest traits that we can teach kids these days is the ability to pivot.
That's so important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just because you're totally right, especially in today's time, like the world is changing almost faster than we can really articulate or notice those changes. So I think the ability to be flexible and adaptable is going to be super central and important for kids growing up now, and for everyone, kids of all ages.
Absolutely. Tell me, what was the initial spark that set this story off?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I lived in Taiwan for 2 years. After teaching at a boarding school in Connecticut for a couple years, I taught high school, and then I wanted to try something a little bit new, which is one of the refrains in the book, and decided to move to Taiwan for 2 years and teach elementary school. And I just had such an incredible time. Like, it's truly difficult, actually, for me to put into words how great of a time I had there. I had, like, a little moped. I drank fresh juice every day. And one of my favorite parts about Taiwan, besides the generosity and warmth of the people and culture there, is the presence of night markets. Because I'm definitely a night owl myself, and it was my first time really living somewhere that really celebrated that in a meaningful and accessible way. Not in the sort of like nightlife adult like things to do in the evening, but like night markets are just such a family friendly event, and it just sort of blew my mind that it was something that happened every single evening. And I just knew that I wanted to write about it in some way in a picture book. It actually changed a lot throughout various draft forms. At first, it was sort of a good night story where everything else is going to sleep, like sort of a lullaby or a goodnight moon type story. But the night market is the only thing that's waking up. I experimented with sort of a lot of different forms, but I kept returning to sort of this central image of the night market. Yeah.
Yeah. For folks who aren't familiar tell us a little bit more about night markets, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So night markets, I actually have my book up, and I talk a little bit about the history and presence of night markets in the back matter. But night markets are essentially, they almost feel like carnivals, and in a lot of ways they are. They're extremely common, especially in Taiwan, and they're basically these nighttime evening markets where there are many vendors that sell a variety of things from food, drinks, clothing, toys, games, all kinds of things. And they're very popular, which is one of my favorite things about night markets. They're very popular not only with tourists, but also with locals. And they just feel like a celebration of community. And the food is just absolutely incredible. Like, night market snacks are some of my favorite things to eat in the world. Things like scallion pancakes or sweet potato balls, flame torched beef cubes, and I always loved like a fresh juice. That's what I always sort of return to. So some of my favorite night market snacks. But yeah, they're just super fun.
Well, right now I'm super hungry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. It's funny the differences in culture. My beautiful wife and I were exploring, and my daughter and son-in-law were exploring Costa Rica a couple of years ago,
Oh, cool.
and went into a wet market. It was the first time we had done that, and my wife turned right around and went out. She wanted no part of it. I loved going down the little alleys and the dark kind of core, and it was just fascinating that you could find fresh food, then there's uncooked food, and then there's live things that are going to become food, and clothing and toys and everything. It was just fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the really incredible things about books, especially picture books, because they're such a visual medium. It really feels like a window into maybe a different culture, a different world, a different perspective that readers might not be familiar with. So even though I myself, I'm always gravitating towards telling stories that are very character driven, like sort of that traditional plot narrative, I also really hope that readers appreciate sort of, seeing what a night market is like in Taiwan and being immersed in that world and enjoying all the sensory language and visuals that go along with that, because I imagine that a lot of readers might not be familiar, and they're some of my favorite places in the world. So,
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I know lots of folks really focus on the benefits of a book being a mirror and helping a kid see themselves represented positively in the pages of books. And that's fantastic. But being an old white guy, that was never something I had to worry about. So I really love the fact that books are a window and give us a chance to look in and get to know another culture, to see the different foods, maybe hear some different words, and most of all, see the fact that even though we're different, we're all part of the same beautiful human family.
yeah, absolutely, exactly. I really hope that my book can be that sort of experience for readers, and I think that's something that I like about it too. And, I think there's room for every kind of story in today's world. But I do sometimes feel like there are stories where you follow a protagonist that is in an unfamiliar environment and you're sort of seeing it through their eyes. And sometimes there's sort of that like tourist gaze. And I hope that is sort of not the case with my book, just because it's just unapologetically immersed in Taiwanese culture and the Taiwanese environment. There's not really like an outsider gaze at all. Like everyone is sort of in the community. So it's just a celebration of Taiwan in many ways. So I really hope it sort of provides that immersive experience for readers.
Yeah. Hey, can you take a moment, tell us a little bit about Taiwan? We hear it's in the news. We know that China would like to welcome Taiwan back. We'll be politically polite here.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about the culture and how it differs from the People's Republic of China.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, it can be complex depending on the person you're asking. I'm Chinese American myself, so I was born and raised in the US, but I have a lot of family in China. But yeah, there definitely are some key differences with Taiwan. I mean, some of those key differences are that Taiwan is just much more progressive in many ways, just because, there's a female president. It's one of the only regions in all of Asia where same-sex marriage is legalized. And I think because of some of those qualities, there's just a really incredible diversity of representation in Taiwan, which is something that I definitely notice in night markets, and was actually something that I noted for my art notes when I was drafting the book. It was really important to me that sort of the background characters and setting reflected that diversity. But I also noticed that Taiwan is just, the people are just incredible. Like the number of times that, especially as I've never lived in China also, so I can't actually really speak to that lived experience, but in terms of living in Taiwan, the number of times that I struck up conversation with a stranger and then was immediately invited to some family barbecue. Like, people are just incredibly welcoming and generous, and I really appreciate that. I think that's why it made it so easy to sort of make myself at home there. Yeah, it's just a really incredible place, and it's just, also it's an island, it's relatively small, maybe like 5 hours tip to tip, and so there's beaches, there's mountains, there's cities. Like, it really had everything I was looking for, so I had an incredible 2 years there.
Yeah. We talk about doing and encouraging our kids to do things that are scary. I imagine it must have been a little bit scary going from teaching in that boarding school in Connecticut to going to the other side of the world.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I was mostly just, and sometimes the two emotions sort of overlap, like fear and excitement, For me, I was definitely just mostly excited. I also sort of grew up moving around and, going back and forth to China to visit family. So I think that for me, it felt a little bit, less anxiety inducing maybe than for others. But yeah, it definitely is also a leap to live in a new country. It was my first time ever living abroad, but I felt really lucky to land in Taiwan. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me, what's I'm imagining a family sitting down. Maybe the parents read the book first, and then go out and get some of those Taiwanese snacks.
Oh, I hope
and
so.
kind of nibble on them while they're reading the book. What fun ways of reading the book can you imagine a family can do?
Fun ways of reading the book. Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many activities that the book lends itself towards, I hope, just because it's such a sensory experience. I really want to sort of shout out my illustrator for doing such an incredible job. So I hope things like inspiring kids to maybe draw their own night market stall, or think about, if you were starting a night market, if you were at a night market, sort of what kind of activities or food or games would you have? And then I'm also hoping that there are just sort of larger conversations sparked by the book, for families, in terms of, what it means to want to do things a little bit differently than what's expected of you, and the ways in which we can support each other through that. There's a lot of celebration of community in the book, just because night markets are such a communal environment, and Mr. Chow relies on his grandchildren and, his neighbors and all of the people that show up for him in order to make the night market a success. So I think conversations around how families support each other, and maybe that'll come up organically, I hope. But yeah, so I think that's honestly, maybe that's not as exciting of an answer as sort of what you suggested. I would love for families to eat snacks. I think that's awesome. But also just, having those conversations around reading and community and what it means to try new things,
One of the things it sounds like your book celebrates is something that we love celebrating here, and that's intergenerational friendships.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's something that's sort of special about the book, because it's something that I don't see that often in picture books. There's so many picture books that sort of, intuitively center a child protagonist, and I kind of love that. Like, the main character, well, originally the main character was actually just the grocery store. Originally, actually, there weren't even people in the book, but after some conversations with my editor, we decided to sort of humanize the story a bit more. But that the fact that those people ended up being older folks, I think, is kind of special, because like you said, I really love seeing that intergenerational piece, and I think it's really important for kids and adults, those adults that are mediating that picture book experience for children, to know that it's not like we stop growing and changing after we grow up, that we still remain those main characters, and we can always sort of reflect on those big questions of who am I, and what's my place in this world, and what's the person I kind of want to be. Like, I hope that this book inspires people to think about how that exploration never really stops.
Yeah. What was it that inspired you to try the picture book art?
Yeah, to sort of write a
Write
picture
the
book.
picture book, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question because actually when I first entered my MFA in writing for children at Simmons University, I very much thought of myself as a writer of long-form projects. I was really interested in middle grade and young adult, primarily fantasy. But it was actually through the program that I really started to appreciate and fall in love with picture books. I took a picture book class. We were required to write picture books as part of our creative writing workshops for the MFA, and I just fell in love with the medium. I think part of the reason for that is I do have some background as a poet as well, and honestly, I kind of think of picture book texts as poems. I was going to say they're very similar, but I actually think that they are poems, just in terms of the sparseness of text, the use of line breaks, like being really deliberate about conveying emotion, using figurative language. Yeah, it was a very natural medium for me to explore and enjoy. So that's how I sort of started my journey into writing picture books.
Was it difficult for you to leave room for the illustrator to tell part of your story?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, no, but I think that is because I was at Simmons and I was taking all of these classes on picture books where we're always sort of interested in the textual narrative and the visual narrative and sort of using that academic scholarly lens of thinking about what different narrative interpretations they're bringing to the work. But I have heard that sometimes in the industry, writers can be a little bit specific about the vision that they have for the illustrations and can maybe try to micromanage that process a little bit. So I think because I came in with that knowledge, I was really, really mindful of not doing that. I never wanted to step on the toes of my illustrator. I always wanted to make sure that she had room to interpret the story in her own right. I felt very grateful that I was asked for my opinion, like often throughout the process. I think I saw maybe like 4 to 5 rounds of sketches and illustrations before we got to final art. And so, yeah, I really appreciate being able to give feedback on the illustrations, but I was always sort of giving it with the no worries at all if not, or like just had an idea, but please disregard if that doesn't fit. Like, yeah, I wanted to leave room for that.
Tommy, was there anything about the illustrations that surprised you in a good way, where you looked at the sketch and said, oh man, that nailed it?
Oh my goodness. I don't know how to pick one. I felt like when I first saw those illustrations, honestly, that was one of my favorite parts of the whole process. There's something just magical about being like, this is just something that existed in my head, and now it feels like a real piece of art that other people are engaging with creatively and meaningfully. Let me think. There's this one spread that I really love where Mr. Chow is speaking with the movie theater usher, Ying, and it's sort of a turning point for him where he's going to his neighbors being like, how do I get up early? How do I get up early? And everyone's sort of trying to give him advice. And the movie theater usher is the first character to be like, why do you have to get up early in the first place? Like, sometimes I love the morning, sometimes I love the night. And yeah, I had no idea what that illustration was going to look like, and Yuting made it like a day to night transition. So there's like just this gorgeous ombre sunset that plays across the spread that I thought was just beautiful. She also came up with this idea of Trader Chow's, which is on the cover. Like, I had never named the grocery store in any way, so it didn't even occur to me what it might be called. So that was such a pleasant surprise for me to see that she had called it Trader Chow's, and we talk about how we both love Trader Joe's so much, and there's all these really fun illustrative Easter eggs throughout the book that just made me smile so much as I was going through it, and I really hope readers go through and smile too when they see them, because they're really wonderful.
Tell me, are you looking forward to doing book readings and reading to classrooms and preschools and libraries?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. In the past 2 years now, I've been writing full time, and that's been such a privilege and a blessing. Like, and I feel so lucky to be able to really center that in my life. But I do miss teaching a lot in a lot of ways. I feel like one of the reasons I gravitated towards children's literature is because of how much I love working with kids. And I don't really get to do that in a professional capacity at all anymore. So I'm so excited to just be able to go back into schools and work with kids in bookstores and, yeah, celebrate reading and share my book with them. I'm super pumped for that.
Hey, what haven't I asked you that you wish people would know about your book?
Ooh, you've been asking all the right questions. You've been asking some great questions. I feel like this is a trick question. Wow, I'm coming up blank. I'm sorry. I really feel like you've covered all the bases.
You're telling me how great I am. That's no worries.
You're doing a perfect job, and I can't think of anything else. We talked about illustrations. We talked about questions, activities, Taiwan. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would just say that, like, as my debut, I'm really proud of this book in a lot of ways, and I do think that it really encapsulates what I hope to do as a writer, and I hope that comes through, you know? People are often like, when you write kids' books, it's such a range of things, right? Like, and I do dabble in picture books, I write chapter books, I'm working on some middle grade and young adult projects still, but the through line has always been sort of Asian American identity, whimsy, and sort of negotiating that balance of being an individual that's in society and being reflective and maybe sometimes critical of that. And I think that all sort of comes together really well in Mr. Chow's Night Market. So I'm really proud of it, and I hope that it sort of reflects a lot of the work that I hope to do in the future.
Well, I'm really excited that you're planning other projects, so you're going to have lots of reasons to come back on the show and celebrate those future books.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Emily, let's tell everybody where they can go to find out more about your book and more about you.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can check out my website, emilysunlee.com, or find me on Instagram at emilysunlee. Try to keep it easy and consistent for folks. And I'm doing a bunch of events with bookstores and libraries, and you can find all that information on my website. And you can find Mr. Chow's Night Market at any place that sells books, pretty much, or order it online. So, yeah, I'd be really honored if you check it out, since it's my first book baby ever.
There you go. There you go. We've had a really fun time. Speaking to the author of Mr. Chow's Night Market, our guest has been Emily Sun Lee. Hey, Emily, thanks so much for being on Reading with Your Kids.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Fart Boy and Reeky Dog, Dino Doom. Fantastic new graphic novel written by New York Times bestselling author Joan Holub, who's written over 200 amazing books for kids. It's school sleepover at the museum. What could go wrong? Well, how about this? A snack-fueled explosion of garbanzo beans and peanuts unleashes a stink so powerful it brings the dinosaurs back to life. Now, Fart Boy, Reeky Dog, and their friends are in the middle of a dino-sized disaster. They have to solve tricky riddles, find missing bones, and stop the stinkiest villain of all, Professor Gravy Pants. Because if they don't, the dinosaurs could take over. Or worse, they could become Dino Dinner. This action-packed graphic novel is bursting with friendships, adventure, and enough laughs to shake the museum walls. If your kids love superheroes, if they love dinosaurs, and if they love to laugh until they can't breathe, then Fart Boy and Reeky Dog Dino Doom is the book for you. Because sometimes the power to save the world comes from the unlikeliest place. Grab your copy today and get ready for a reading adventure that's truly dynamite. Oh, I am so excited. We are so lucky to have the author of Watercress. It's the Newbery Honor-winning book from our guest, the author, Andrea Wang. Hey, Andrea, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Jed. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on, too. Why don't we just start by you giving us, by telling us a little bit about Watercress?
Oh, sure. Watercress is a semi-autobiographical story of a memory that I have of being made to pick watercress by the side of the road as a kid. And I grew up in rural Ohio, and my parents were Chinese immigrants. And so I was really not happy about having to do this because I felt already like I didn't belong. And the book itself talks about my experience of that, and then it has sort of a fictionalized ending where, you know, the character comes to a realization about her own parents' childhoods in China and what watercress means to them. So she comes at the end to a newfound appreciation of her culture and heritage.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, Andrea and I were both talking about growing up, and I was telling her about the somewhat wild and crazy neighborhood that I grew up in, where everybody fit in, even though we were different. You know, there was some diversity there, but and we would fight with each other. But once we left the neighborhood to go to another neighborhood, we were all cousins. It was like the biggest family in the world. I mean, and we didn't look alike, but we're all cousins. You mess with one of us. And what was it like growing up feeling like you didn't fit in?
It was hard, for sure, and lonely. And I sought refuge in books. And I think that's why I'm a writer today, is because I spent so many hours, like literally in the closet of my bedroom, with the cat and, you know, a pile of chocolate chips and a book. And so, you know, I had friends, but I'm not sure that I understood them. And there were definitely a lot of times that I didn't feel understood. You know, we were one of 2 Chinese American families in town that I remember with kids my age. I had a fairly diverse classroom in the sense that there were white kids, there were biracial kids, there were African American kids, but I was the only Asian American kid in my grade for all the years that I lived in Ohio.
Interesting. I don't think of, and you just kind of reinforce it, I don't think of Ohio being, and especially rural Ohio, being a place where there's a lot of Asian families living. I guess the question is, what brought you there? What brought your family there?
Oh, my father was a professor at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, which is the town I grew up in. And it's a progressive town for that time period. Mm-hmm. And still is a very liberal, progressive town. But you're right, there were not many Asian American people there. So he taught Chinese studies and, you know, he taught Chinese language at the college.
Excellent. I've shared on the podcast here, we've hosted international kids in our home over the years, and we've had 5 amazing daughters come to live with us from China, and they became part of our family and remain part of our family. It's unfortunate now that they're back home, it's really difficult to communicate with them because of restrictions in China on using social media and whatnot. So I've really missed them a lot.
Oh, WeChat.
Yeah,
you should download. You use WeChat?
I have to figure out how to do that.
That's how I communicate with my in-laws who are in Shanghai.
Okay. We'll check that out. So you were talking about falling in love with books and just reading, and that was kind of your safe space. You went into the STEM fields.
I did.
Yeah. Talk to us about, going from being that book lover to getting into the STEM fields to returning to becoming an author.
I have always been a book lover. I always wanted to write, but my parents were very traditional, Chinese parents. I wouldn't say that they were tiger parents or anything like that, but they were very focused on my getting an education and having a job that they thought would provide me with stability. And being a writer was not a stable job. And it still isn't. It's very difficult to make a living as a writer. Mm-hmm. But I love science because I had always wanted to figure out how the world works. What makes people tick, just the interconnectedness of everything. And so when I was in college, my parents steered me away from an English degree and, basically said you need to get either a science degree or some other sort of, degree that will lead to a professional job. And I studied ecology and got my, a biology degree because I really liked learning how the world works. And I still write about a lot of that, things that are connected. And, it was a fairly, I loved my job as an environmental scientist, but I had children and I stopped working because it was really difficult to raise children and have a full-time job at the same time. And I was fortunate enough to be able to stay home with them. And I started reading them picture books and fell in love with that format and decided to go back to school when they were a little older and got my master's degree in creative writing. And from there, it's just, it's just sort of taken off, which has been amazing. But yeah, my children really inspired me to come back to writing.
That's wonderful. Now, were your parents able to see your success as an author?
No, unfortunately not. They both passed before I published my first book. And, and I'm still inspired by them. Watercress is very much my continuing a conversation with them in a way. It's in the back, in the author's note, I write that it's both an apology and a love letter to my parents. And people often focus on that and they're like, how can it, be both? Or what do you mean by this? And to me, it seems fairly clear, like I can't tell them I'm sorry for being, not as compassionate or empathetic as I could have been towards them when I was little. And also just an appreciation for everything they went through and how they raised me.
Yeah. When you mentioned that you didn't have as much empathy, were you angry that you weren't the same, that they weren't the same, and and how come I can't be like all the other kids?
Sure. Definitely. Yeah. There was a degree of anger and resentment. I mean, it's nothing they could have changed, right? It's just the way it is. We're Chinese. But, my friends who have grown up in communities that had a lot more Asian Americans had a very different experience growing up. So, I was probably resentful, like, why did we have to live here? And why don't I belong? And why can't you behave like all the other kids' parents, So there's that degree of, shame and embarrassment that I talk about in the book.
I'm imagining that this would be a wonderful way for family just to sit down and talk about themselves and how they're different from the other members of the community, even if they look alike, even if they have the same ethnicity. And also at the same time talking about how we might be able to reach out to kids that are in our class that might feel the way you felt growing up.
Yeah, I really do hope that the book is a conversation starter, for kids of all races and all backgrounds. We've all felt like our parents have embarrassed us or made us, do things we didn't want to do. We all feel alone at some point. And, when I do school visits, I talk to the kids and I say, even the most popular kid in school has felt like they don't belong at some point. And so, when I was little and felt very alone, it never occurred to me that writing about it would be this universal emotion that everybody could connect to. But, the reception to the book has shown me that we all do share those feelings.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I was very aware of when my son was in middle school, and I would drive the van around, and all of the guys would spend a ton of energy trying to pretend that they knew it all and that they were cool and that they had all the answers. And at one point, after listening to this for about 45 minutes one particular day, I just kind of turned to him and said, hey, you guys are all trying to pretend that you know it all. None of you guys know anything. So why don't you just sit back and just appreciate the fact that you're all clueless?
Right. Middle school is such a hard
Oh,
age.
such a difficult age. Such a difficult age. You talked about being really interested in as a scientist, as a, in working in the ecology, finding out how things were connected and how the world works. How do people work? How does the connections between people work?
I mean, that's the $64,000 question, right? Like, if we knew. I think that's why I write, because I don't really know. Writing for me is a process of trying to figure it out. And I'm not saying that I have any of the answers, but I think just being emotionally honest in what I write is bringing me closer to understanding how people work, or just trying, it is more than just a matter of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And that's a step for sure. But I think the conversations need to happen. The sharing of stories and family history needs to happen for us to really understand our connections to each other.
How hard is it for you as a writer to open yourself up and to be emotionally honest and share that on the page?
It's so hard. I mean, I'm, a diehard introvert. These are emotions that I would never have admitted to as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. I mean, I was one of those kids in your van trying to pretend that I had all the answers and I knew what was going on. You don't want to show any weakness, right? But somehow over the years of working on this story, I mean, Watercress has had many different forms, and I rewrote it as a picture book, and that was about 7 or 8 years into the process of working on it. And I just went there. Both my parents had passed away. I really just tried to inhabit my younger self and have that conversation with them on the page. And it was really hard, but really cathartic. I mean, I cried the entire time typing. And then, kept crying afterwards whenever I read it because it was so raw. It's taken many readings of the book so that I can read it without choking up. But I think kids deserve that kind of effort from us, right? That kind of emotional honesty, as I said.
Yeah. Why do you think that this story was best told as a picture book?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, it started out as a personal essay for adults because I was taking a class in writing the personal essay, and it wasn't working. And I decided many years later to try and write it as a picture book, but I was told in third person. It's told in first person present tense right now. And that really wasn't working, but it allowed me to get that sort of emotional distance that I needed to put more of that rawness into it, more of that emotional honesty. And then when I finally converted it to first person is where I found sort of that sweet spot, right? I was finally able to acknowledge this is me and this is how I feel. And I think it works as a picture book because there are so many kids that don't understand why their parents do what they do or ask them to do certain things. As parents, we don't necessarily feel that we have to explain ourselves, right? And so I think most kids can relate to that. And I also really like that as a picture book, kids are being exposed to these difficult feelings and concepts in a book, and maybe they'll find something that resonates with them, and they'll feel less alone.
Yeah. I love that books, especially kids' books, can be used as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors.
Yeah.
What can kids outside of the Asian community see about your community, about you through Watercress?
I think, again, hopefully that we all share the same feelings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we share a common humanity. We're all the same as people. We might look different, but we deserve to be here. We are American. We have all these thoughts and dreams and feelings as everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
And I have actually heard from many people of all backgrounds and races who have said, oh, my parents made me pick whatever from, you know, the field, the roadside, etc. We stole apples out of the orchard, whatever. And that was terribly embarrassing too. And it seems to be this common experience of foraging, but also of being, you know, ashamed of our families,
mm-hmm.
that we, you know, we don't need to. I think we need to see that we should be proud of who we are.
Yeah. You use the expression that this book is kind of like a continuing conversation with your parents. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've been able to express things to them through the book. Have you heard anything back from your parents?
Well, they're passed. They've passed away.
I know that, but I mean, has their spirit, have you felt anything coming back from their spirit? And I know, and I'm not saying like ghost, you know, but just you know, feeling.
I've not been visited,
right? No.
But I think they would be proud of me. I hope that they'd be proud of me. But I also think that they'd be like, well, why this story? Mm-hmm. You know, did you have to tell this story? And you know, I think my answer would be, well, look how many people it's helped so far. Mm-hmm. So yes. It deserved to be told. I think for them it would have been just something really small, mm-hmm. you know, like barely worth mentioning. But I do think it's important to show that not all Asian Americans are crazy rich Asians. Mm-hmm. We're not all, you know, living the high life, that there's, you know, a significant proportion who either need to forage or, you know, struggle making mm-hmm. ends meet.
Yeah, yeah. The book has been loved by everybody. It was a Newbery Honor winner. Jason's illustrations won the Caldecott Medal. It was given an award by the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. What's that feel like?
Incredible and surreal, and it's a couple weeks later. I'm still kind of in disbelief. It's just been amazing, and I think I'm just so honored and so grateful. Mm-hmm. It's hard to put into words, right? Because especially the Newbery Honor is typically not given to picture books, or hasn't been in the past. So that's just it has been an incredible experience. Yeah. A validation mm-hmm. of my work.
Yeah. I know the Caldecott is memorable to me because mm-hmm. growing up in Boston almost 100 years ago, I owned Make Way for Ducklings. That was one of the books, and that had that medal on the cover. And I thought that was so cool because it was raised and you could touch it, and it was, you know, and this is my book and it has a medal on it and everything. What was it like working? I know you illustrators and writers of picture books don't work hand in hand, but what was it like collaborating with Jason on this book?
It was awesome. I mean, because you're right. Usually the author and the illustrator don't even speak, or, you know, may have never met or anything. And, you know, are in fact sometimes discouraged from talking to each other. Whereas in the case of Watercress, our editor, Neil Porter, thought that since it was such a personal story for me, that it would help Jason to talk to me about it and learn more about my family and stories and maybe see photos. So he introduced us to each other at a conference in the before times when they were still in person. And, you know, we sat and talked, and over the couple of years that he worked on the illustrations, I shared photos and we shared family stories. We had phone calls and stuff. It was very collaborative, but I, you know, really wanted to make sure that I didn't impose my vision of what it should look like on him. And I wanted also, because I didn't honestly know, I'm not a visual artist. I didn't know how, he was going to depict those flashbacks, those memories. This book is so internal, right? But he just did an amazing job, right? And all the emotions that play across the faces of the characters it's incredible.
Yeah. It's amazing. And picture books and illustrations can be so very, very powerful and just add many, many different layers to the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was one of the things I do remember remember when I was reading with my kids many years ago and just sit down and read a page and then just talk about the illustrations. What do you think that they're feeling, and what's her expression? What's his expression? What else is going on in the background? What do you think it would be like to be in that moment?
Yeah, that's great. I do think that growing up the way I did, I learned how to decode, people's expressions and the tones of their voices maybe a little bit more, and tried to infuse that into the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, this is not your first book. You have lots of books out there. If somebody is just loves watercress, as I'm sure they will, what would be the next couple of books that you would suggest they check out from your library?
From what's on my shelves or what I wrote?
From what you wrote.
From what I wrote. Well, I would say if you're looking for a chapter book, The Many Meanings of Meilon is my debut middle grade that came out last fall, and it is also very much a character that resembles me. And it's interesting. My editor said that Meilon sounds like a prequel to Watercress, but for older readers, because in that book, the main character, Meilon, moves from Boston Chinatown, where she's lived all her life, to rural Ohio and encounters microaggressions and is renamed and, learns how to deal with all of that. And as far as picture books go, I have a new one coming out from Neil Porter Books called Luli and the Language of Tea, and it's about an immigrant child from China who is in a classroom setting with a bunch of other kids who don't speak English and all speak different languages because it's like an ESL classroom. And the word for tea in over 200 languages originally came from the Chinese word for tea, where, tea was discovered. So saying that word aloud sort of brings all these kids together because they recognize it in some form in their own language.
Awesome. Well, having spent many, many hours in Boston's Chinatown performing and with friends and, of course, eating, and also spending lots of time in rural Ohio, that's a big difference. Talk about two different worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I personally did the reverse. I grew up in rural Ohio and moved to Boston. I didn't live in Chinatown. Mm-hmm. I lived, in the suburbs, but it was like this palpable sense of relief stepping into Chinatown. Yeah. Everybody looks like me. Everybody gets where I'm coming from. I feel very comfortable here.
That's cool. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about watercress and more about Andrea Wang.
My website, which is AndreaYWang.com, and I've got lots of links to different interviews and podcasts, and I'll be linking this podcast there too.
Awesome. We've had a great time speaking to the author of the Newbery Honor-winning book, Watercress, and we've been speaking with Andrea Wang. Hey, Andrea, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids, and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. If this episode made you smile or gave you something to think about, please consider sharing a link to the show with someone you love. Leave a 5-star review, and of course, subscribe to the show wherever you find your favorite shows. We're so happy that we have such a big Reading with Your Kids family connected with us here on the podcast and also on our social media channels. We'd love for you to join. Facebook.com/Reading with Your Kids, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram, at JedleyMagic on X. our YouTube channel, youtube.com/readingwithyourkids, and our website, readingwithyourkids.com. If you are an author, please do visit readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button up at the top of the page. You can find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast. It's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. It also will let you know about our Certified Great Read program. This is a really wonderful program that helps parents know that your book is worthy of consideration to add to their family library. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, Emily Sun Lee. Please check out Mr. Chow's Night Market. Also want to thank Andrea Wang. Please check out Watercress. I want to thank my team, Chris Doherty, Jackson Saltalera. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support and love she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for all the support and love you give your kids. And thank you so very much for helping to make the world a better, kinder, more empathetic place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.